Hey there, thanks for tuning in to S News. If you want to stay up to date and never miss a story like this, go ahead and subscribe, like, and drop a comment below. Your support really helps us bring you more of the news that matters. Putin seizes $50 billion from Russian oligarchs as the economy collapses. They're the Russian oligarchs. Over and over again, the Russian oligarchs. Take Boris Berezovsky, one of the richest men in Russia, who later became one of President Vladimir Putin's harshest critics. The FBI even raided 2 properties linked to a Russian oligarch who played a central role in the Mueller investigation. Back in the early 2000s, Putin stepped into a chaotic Russia and promised order. He kept the country's billionaires in check, letting them keep their wealth as long as they didn't get in his way. These oligarchs were money tycoons who made billions in the wild 90s by grabbing up state assets for next to nothing. For a while, they supported him. In return, he gave them protection and power. But that deal's long gone. Slowly but surely, Putin turned the whole system against them. What started as a partnership became a trap, full of mysterious deaths, sanctions, and stolen fortunes. As the elite lose their grip, ordinary Russians suffer too. Putin keeps looting them in broad daylight. Today, we're breaking down how Putin has slowly and deliberately drained wealth, power, and control from anyone not in his inner circle. To understand how it all started, we have to go back. When Putin first became president in 2000, Russia was a mess. The Soviet Union had collapsed a decade earlier, and the 90s were total chaos. State assets, from oil fields to aluminum factories, were sold off in shady privatization deals. A small group of ruthless, clever businessmen became insanely rich overnight. These were the oligarchs, people like Boris Berezovsky, Vladimir Gusinsky, and Mikhail Khodorkovsky. They didn't just own companies, they owned entire industries. They had private jets, mansions in London, and enough political influence to build or destroy governments. By the late 90s, they basically ran the country, funding politicians and shaping laws to protect their empires. But when Putin came to power, he saw them as a threat. Not because they were rich, but because their wealth gave them power that he didn't yet have. Putin didn't want to destroy the oligarchs. He just wanted to control them. So he gave them a deal. Stay out of politics, keep quiet, and you can keep your billions. It was simple. Don't cross me and I won't come after you. Most of them got the message and agreed. They got to keep their companies, their yachts, their luxury lifestyles, so long as they stayed loyal and didn't mess with the Kremlin. For a while it worked. The oligarchs lived like royalty, and Putin solidified his grip on the country. The system seemed stable. Russia's economy was growing, oil prices were high, and the elite were happy to play by the new rules. But not everyone did.
Take Mikhail Khodorkovsky, then the richest man in Russia. He ran Yukos, one of the country's largest oil companies, worth tens of billions. But Khodorkovsky wasn't just rich, he was ambitious. He started funding opposition parties, talking about political reform, even hinting at a run for president. That was a direct challenge to Putin, and it didn't go unnoticed. In 2003, Khodorkovsky was dramatically arrested by armed agents after his private jet landed. The official charges were fraud and tax evasion, but nobody really believed that. His trial was a public warning. Cross the Kremlin, and you're finished. Yukos was hit with huge tax bills, went bankrupt, and its assets were picked apart. Most ended up with Rosneft, a state-run oil company led by one of Putin's closest allies, Igor Sechin. Khodorkovsky spent 10 years in a Siberian prison before being released and exiled in 2013. His fortune was gone, and his influence crushed. The message to other oligarchs couldn't have been clearer. No one is too big to fall. He wasn't the only one. Boris Berezovsky, another big name from the 90s, learned the same lesson. He had helped Putin rise to power, controlling media, airlines and oil companies, and didn't hide his influence. But once he started criticizing Putin's government, everything changed. His TV network came under pressure. His businesses were hit with audits and lawsuits. By 2001, he'd fled to London, leaving his empire in ruins. Russia issued arrest warrants, and he spent the rest of his life in exile, fighting legal battles and losing his clout. In 2013, he was found dead in his bathroom in what looked like a suicide, though questions still remain. Vladimir Gusinsky, who owned the independent NTV television channel, was another early target. His crime? Letting his channel air reports critical of the Kremlin. He was arrested in 2000, forced to sell NTV to a state-friendly company, and eventually exiled. He now lives in Israel, far from the power he once held. These weren't random crackdowns. They were calculated moves to send a message to the rest of the elite. Step out of line and you're next.
By the mid-2000s, a new kind of oligarch took over. The flashy, independent moguls of the 90s were gone. In their place came a new generation of billionaires who understood the rules. People like Roman Abramovich, who stayed loyal and kept his wealth, or Alisher Usmanov, who built a metals and telecom empire while staying in Putin's good graces. They were rich, sure, but not free. Their wealth came with strings attached. As long as they stayed loyal, they were fine. It was like living in a gilded cage. You could have mansions, private islands, and football clubs, but you were never truly in charge. One wrong move, and the system would come for you.
Putin's greatest weapon was the system itself. He didn't need to arrest every oligarch or seize every company. He just had to show that he could. His favorite tool? Surprise tax audits. A company could suddenly be hit with massive tax bills for unpaid dues from years ago, plus fines that could bankrupt even the biggest firms. Prosecutors and security agents were always ready to launch investigations that could drag on for years. Asset seizures were another tactic. A factory, mine, or oil field could be taken overnight and handed to a state-owned company or a Putin ally. For those who resisted, exile was the best-case scenario. Prison was always on the table, and sometimes worse. The oligarchs were no longer partners. They were subordinates. And for years, this arrangement held. The economy was stable. Oil and gas money flowed. The oligarchs had enough to keep them comfortable.
But everything changed in February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine. The war changed everything, not just because of the fighting, but because of the harsh Western sanctions. Russia's economy and elite were hit hard. The oligarchs had spent years stashing their wealth abroad, only to see it frozen. Yachts were seized in Italian and French ports. Bank accounts in London, New York, and Switzerland were locked. Real estate in Monaco and Miami became off-limits. For Putin, this was another chance to tighten his grip. He used the sanctions as a weapon, telling the oligarchs the real enemy was the West. His message: if foreign governments can freeze your money, so can the Kremlin, unless you prove your loyalty. The war became a loyalty test. Oligarchs were expected to pitch in, whether they wanted to or not. Some were pressured to donate huge sums to the state or Kremlin-backed projects like rebuilding occupied parts of Ukraine. Others saw their companies nationalized or handed to Putin's allies. Refusing wasn't an option. One wrong word, one sign of resistance, and it could all disappear. Take Oleg Deripaska, once Russia's richest man with a $30 billion fortune. His aluminum empire, Rusal, supplied everything from soda cans to fighter jets. But when he called the war meaningless in 2022, Putin didn't let it slide. Western sanctions had already frozen his assets abroad, including a $250 million mansion in the UK, slashing his net worth to under $2 billion by 2024. At home, Putin turned up the heat. In 2023, the government seized a hotel owned by one of Deripaska's companies, claiming it was needed for state use. Since then, Rusal has been under huge pressure to produce aluminum for military use, from tanks to missiles. Russian officials demanded more production, higher taxes, and forced the company to channel profits straight into the war effort. He had no choice. Refuse, and he'd lose everything, not just a hotel. Putin wasn't just punishing him for speaking out. He was draining his fortune piece by piece to fuel the war machine. Even Roman Abramovich, owner of Chelsea Football Club, wasn't spared. Worth over $12 billion before the war, he tried to stay neutral, even acting as a peace negotiator in 2022. But that didn't save him. Western sanctions forced him to sell Chelsea for $3.2 billion, a huge loss, and his properties in the UK were frozen. With his wealth trapped inside Russia, Putin saw an opportunity. Abramovich's steel company, Evraz, became a key supplier to the Russian military, providing materials for weapons and bases in occupied territories. By 2024, the Kremlin ramped up pressure on him, demanding Evraz boost its output to meet defense needs. Lawmakers publicly criticized him, saying he was obligated to support the army. He funneled profits into war projects to stay in good standing, knowing that one wrong move could cost him everything he still owned in Russia. Putin didn't seize all his money, but he made sure Abramovich's wealth served the state, draining his resources to fuel the war. Then there's Alisher Usmanov, once worth about $18 billion. He thought he was safe. His metals empire and telecom holdings like Metalo Invest and Megaphone made him a Kremlin favorite, but even he couldn't escape the war's demands. In 2022, sanctions froze his yacht and private jet. worth over $600 million. That left him stuck in Russia's system, which Putin used to his advantage. By 2024, Usmanov was under heavy pressure to help finance the war. His steel plants supplied raw materials to the military, and his newspaper, Kommersant, ran pro-Kremlin propaganda. The state didn't need to take over his companies, it only needed to threaten to. That was enough to get him to open his wallet. His businesses started pouring money into defense contracts, helping fund the 13 trillion rubles Russia spent on the military in 2025. Putin turned Usmanov's loyalty into a cash machine. It's not just Deripaska, Abramovich, or Usmanov. Other big names have been hit hard too. Their fortunes stripped away as Putin tightens his grip. Take Mikhail Fridman, the banking and retail tycoon who co-founded Alpha Group, one of Russia's largest financial conglomerates. His net worth was over $15 billion before the war, with investments in everything from supermarkets to telecoms. He tried to stay neutral when the invasion started, even called for an end to the conflict in 2022. That didn't sit well with the Kremlin. By 2024, his Russian businesses faced sudden audits and tax investigations. Reports emerged that he was being pressured to sell off his stakes in Alpha Bank to state-friendly buyers for a fraction of their true value. Now Fridman is stuck. His wealth is shrinking as the Kremlin bleeds him to support the war. Sure, he still has his London mansion and private jet, but those are just props. He's far from the only one in this situation. Not that it helps much. There's also Gennady Timchenko, one of Putin's closest allies from the old KGB days. He built a $20 billion empire through oil and gas trading, mostly via his company Gunvor. He was always loyal and ready to back Kremlin projects. But even loyalty doesn't guarantee safety. By 2024, his Russian businesses were under fire. The government launched probes into his energy deals, accusing him of tax violations. Insiders say it was just a pretext to force him to donate hundreds of millions to state coffers, mostly for military spending. Timchenko is still rich, but he's bleeding. His company is under heavy pressure to bankroll Putin's war machine. And then there's Vadim Moshkovich, whose case is even more dramatic. He's the billionaire behind Rusagro, a major agricultural company producing sugar, pork, and grain. He was a quiet oligarch who stayed out of politics, but in March 2025, he was suddenly arrested for fraud and embezzlement, a shock to the Russian elite. State media reported the arrest, but the details were vague at best, just broad accusations of major crimes. His company offices were raided, Rusagro's assets were frozen. The truth? Putin's government wanted his money. Wars had drained the budget and Moshkovich's profitable empire became a target. His arrest sent a clear message. Even low-profile business giants weren't safe. His company is now being broken apart, likely handed over to Kremlin insiders, while he fights to stay out of prison. And then there's one of the most recent examples, Konstantin Studakov. He was one of Russia's richest men, a gold mining tycoon running Yuzhanot Salato, a leading gold producer. He was loyal, stayed quiet, and supported the Kremlin. But in July this year, everything changed. He tried to flee to Turkey in his $50 million private jet, but authorities stopped the plane. A court then ordered the nationalization of his empire, a sanitized way of saying it was stolen. The official reason was vague violations, but the truth was obvious. Putin needed money for the war, and Studakov's mines were a gold mine. Literally. His assets were seized overnight and handed over to state-run companies or loyal allies. Posts on X captured the panic spreading through Moscow's elite. One day Studakov was called loyal, the next he was a target. His fortune, built over decades, vanished in days, funneled straight into Putin's war chest. This isn't about fighting corruption or rooting out the bad guys. Putin isn't trying to make things fair, it's all about control. The oligarchs posed a threat simply because their wealth gave them independence, and Putin couldn't allow that. So he crushed them one by one, using arrests, seizures, and sanctions to tighten his grip. The war gave him the perfect excuse. Now these billionaires live in a world where private jets and Swiss chalets are just empty symbols. They're no longer players, they're pawns, owned by the system they helped create. Through these tactics, Putin has collected over $50 billion, and it doesn't look like he's stopping anytime soon. But his grip doesn't end with the billionaires. The real wealth he's draining comes from somewhere else, something much more ordinary. As the oligarchs lose their power, regular Russians are suffering even more. They're not losing yachts or foreign villas. They're losing something bigger, the ability to build a future.
For the average Russian, the theft isn't dramatic raids or public trials, it's the daily grind. It's the slow erosion of what they have. It's the bank refusing your loan no matter how good your credit is. It's the grocery bill that keeps rising while your salary stays the same. It's the dream of owning a home or starting a small business that seems further away every year.
The system works, but not for the people living in it. Let's break it down, starting with the banks, where the pressure is most obvious. Russia's banking system is dominated by state-owned giants like Sberbank and VTB. These aren't friendly neighborhood banks. They're arms of the government, designed not to help people but to serve the Kremlin's priorities. If you're an average person, good luck getting a loan. Mortgages, car loans, or small business funding are either impossible or come with interest rates so high they're financial traps. The average mortgage rate in Russia is about 23%, if you qualify. Banks are extremely selective, and most of the money they lend goes to state-backed companies, defense industries, or well-connected insiders. Meanwhile, the small cafe owner or young couple trying to buy their first apartment is buried in paperwork, rejections, or predatory terms that make borrowing a losing game. That's not by accident. The banks are doing exactly what they're built for, funneling money upward. Despite the economic chaos, imagine this. Sberbank, which controls nearly half of Russia's banking market, reported record profits in 2024, 1.5 trillion rubles, or about $15 billion. VTB wasn't far behind, pulling in 423 billion rubles. But these profits aren't from helping regular people. They come from high fees, government contracts, and investments in things the Kremlin cares about, like weapons manufacturing or energy projects. Ordinary Russians, meanwhile, are left with savings accounts that barely earn interest and steadily lose value. The banks are a pipeline that moves wealth from the people to the system, and the public has no say in it. Then there's inflation, which hits harder than any official tax. War has drained Russia's budget, and the central bank has scrambled to prevent a deeper collapse. Their main move? Raising interest rates. By mid-2025, the key interest rate was 20%, up from about 19% at the end of 2024. The goal was to curb inflation, but it made borrowing nearly impossible and pushed prices even higher. The government claimed inflation was 8.5% at the end of 2024, but most people knew the truth. It was worse. Food prices in particular soared. Chicken that cost 200 rubles a kilo 2 years ago now sells for 300. Basic items like bread, milk, and vegetables all jumped in price. Utility bills went up 10 to 15% in many regions in just 1 year.
All this while the average Russian earns about 73,000 rubles per month, or roughly $700 as of early 2025. Rent in cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg can eat up half that. What's left barely covers food or clothes. This isn't bad luck or poor planning. It's the result of a system that bleeds regular people first.
As the state funds its wars and vanity projects, it's the public that pays. Not through obvious taxes, but through life getting harder, more expensive, more out of reach. Wages aren't keeping up. The average salary sounds decent on paper, but it hasn't really grown. Adjusted for inflation, most Russians are earning less than they did 5 years ago. Finally, thanks so much for listening to this video. If you found it helpful or interesting, we'd love for you to follow S News and check out our future videos. Don't forget to subscribe.